Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Podman community meeting. Today is Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. As a reminder, what this meeting is all about, we meet on the first Tuesday of even numbered months, such as February, April, so forth. And we may move the timing from time to make it friendlier for India to China and Australia, although we haven't done that for a while. We probably ought to. Topics are driven from prior meetings or requests to me at tsweeney@redhat.com, or you can add them to the agenda as Castedo did, which is great. Love that. And we accept any discussions that are related to Podman, Builda, Scopio, or any related container projects here. We also have a kind of a cousin meeting, a Podman Cabal meeting, which happens on the odd number of months on Tuesdays, the first one of the month. And that's more of a design and ideas for changes for Podman kind of a meeting. I'll be taking the meeting notes inside the Hack Committee noted here. If you see that I've messed anything up or you want to add to it, especially if you have any URLs that you want to include, please let me know. And presenters, if you could send me any of your slides after the meeting, I would appreciate it, and I'll include those. So today we are going to start off with a Podman v5.4 update, which is coming up in the next couple of weeks here. And then Matt will also go and talk about the Firewalld and Podman update. Neil's going to give us an update on where we stand in our move to CNCF for Podman, Builda, Scopio, and others. Brent's going to be giving us a demo for artifacts, which is a new feature that's coming in with Podman 5.4. Paul will be talking about Netavark's new features that are coming up shortly, and that too will be involved with 5.4 release, although Netavark itself kind of tagged together. And then Castedo will be talking about personal multi-session containers and CNest. And with that, I will hand it off to Matt to start us up.
All right, we have a packed schedule, so I will try and keep things brief. Let me go ahead and share the release notes and just, okay. So, as people may be tracking, we are in the release candidate phase for Podman 5.4 or 5.4. 2 weeks ago, we did RC1. Last week, we did RC2. I am expecting RC3 today or maybe early tomorrow, depending on how things go. And final release should be next week, assuming all goes well. Just a brief overview of what to expect. Our starring feature is support for OCI artifacts. This is still very early. It's not fully feature complete, and we reserve the right to change the user interface because obviously we're still figuring out what the best way of doing things is. Feedback very welcomed, but we've added a suite of commands under Podman Artifact, which are used for interacting with OCI artifacts, creating them, listing them, pushing them to registries, pulling them down. And obvious applications for this are going to be putting large files, particularly AI models, but basically anything, inside of containers easily. We have a bunch of other updates. We have some updates to Podman Update, which allows you to make changes to health checks. We now have subpath support for volumes. We do have two breaking changes I would like to highlight. We don't usually do these outside of major releases, but we decided these were not sufficiently large to require a major release. Number one, Podman on Mac, and specifically Podman on Intel Macs. We don't have sufficient hardware to adequately test this, and at the moment, we're basically moving it over to best effort support. We will still accept patches related to it. We are still going to be producing binaries and machine images, so you can still use it. But our ability to fix bugs is limited by developer access to hardware. If anyone wants to step up and help us maintain this, we would welcome that. But for now, we are moving it down to best effort support only. And second one, there is a minor change to how comments were handled in Quadlets, which involves an accident where instead of using semicolons for comments like systemd does, we accidentally coded it up to use colons instead. We're fixing that so it uses semicolons. I doubt many people found this feature, but if you did, you will have to change your Quadlet files for Podman 5.4. So that, I believe, is a good summary of what to expect. We have a good bevy of bug fixes. We've got some minor API changes, and I'm expecting some additional fixes to land shortly related to putting NVIDIA devices inside of containers, particularly using the remote API and Docker Compose. And yeah, that's about it for Podman 5.4 updates. Next up was Podman Firewalld. I will also keep this one brief. So Firewalld has added a new feature in Firewalld 2.3.0, which isn't released yet. No, I'm wrong about that. It's released, but it's not in distros yet. That's what I was trying to say. But it's called strict forward ports. It is not enabled by default, but if it is turned on, it basically prevents all port forwarding from happening with Podman containers. We have included a patch in the Netavark version that will ship with Podman 5.4 that will throw a helpful error if this happens. But basically, TLDR, if you turn on strict forward ports in Firewalld, you cannot use Podman run -p. You're going to have to manually forward the ports with the Firewalld API. And the reason behind this, I imagine, is system administrators who don't want Podman automatically forwarding ports through the firewall. So not enabled by default, but if you do enable it, things get very different. Okay. Tom, back to you, I believe.
Okay, great. Matt, thanks. Anybody have any questions on any of that? Alrighty, I'm just going to give it a quick beat between these since we do have a number of talks today. And with that, I will hand it over to Neil to start up our CNCF discussion.
Okay, I'm just sharing my screen with, and I'll put the issue, I'll give you the issue, Tom, to put in the minutes. But this is, we're very happy. What they call the TOC has accepted our application to contribute Podman and Builda and Scopio and a few other things to CNCF. And we're going through the onboarding process right now, which may have some changes that will be impacting us in the future, which is like we're going to set up a Slack channel in CNCF. And so we might have to think about how we, the messaging platforms we already use, like Matrix and stuff like that. And we'll probably have to think about our mailing lists and stuff like that as well. But we'll be going through these tasks. So basically, some of these things are here where we have to figure out, we have our Podman IO domains that we have to change to CNCF ownership. We have to send them our artwork, the seals, etc., and some more website changes. We've done already the DCO. We have to make sure our code of conduct is up to date, and our list of maintainers is sent to them, etc. So not big things, but we'll be starting that. And one of the big things was that we were supposed to move our GitHub to a standalone repository, but we will be not doing that immediately because it has large impacts to our CI/CD. And that's the update. So we're planning on, they want us to try to get this all done within a month. So we'll be working on that. And then we'll move on to work on moving through Sandbox into incubation. And I can put the link in chat. That's it. Any questions?
Just a clarification, the GitHub move isn't planned within a month, correct?
Correct.
It's all the documentation, procedural kind of stuff.
Yes, mostly documentation, procedural, except for I think the messaging might be something that we move a bit quicker on or something like that. But we'll figure it out. We'll let everybody know and do it publicly. It's all in the CNCF world, so.
So given that, thank you, Neil. And next up, Brent, doing demos for the artifacts that we were just talking about a little while ago.
You're on mute, Brent.
How are we looking? Is that
Yeah, good side.
legible?
Yeah, good
Okay.
side.
All right. So as has been mentioned, one of the features going into 5.4 that we're excited about is revolves around OCI artifacts. And this is our initial implementation. It's largely at this point around the ability to be able to manage these artifacts, and they are managed much like container images. And so in the sense that they're managed on the local file system, unlike manifests purely, they're kind of in a managed, they have a, I'll say a little bit of a state information. You can see the typical verbs associated with most of our objects in that we have an add, an inspect, and a list, a pull, push, and remove. The upside here is because you're dealing with image registries, pull and push are going to be largely the same as pushing with images, including the various TLS certificate related options that come with that. So I thought I'd just walk through a typical workflow and show it off a little bit. And then please, if there are questions, just do the hand raise thing and I'll pause and you can ask a question. All right. So to look at what's in our current local store, you can use something like LS. Here we've got a very similar look. I probably don't have anything pulled. It should be very similar as images. There. That's intentional to try to keep some comfortability between what folks already know and what we're displaying. The ls command has is one of the ones that has a few different options. We can, much like images, there's a format, there's a no trunk, which means you get the full digest, and then the no heading, which just removes the header off of what's returned. We can also do things like pull. I have a multi-file artifact sitting on Quay that I'll pull. And you can see there very quickly, it's the same user experience you get with container images, which is intentional. And if we take a look there, that's how that is displayed. The size is, if you have multiple files, the size is the summary of all of them, or the accumulation of all of them. Inspecting an artifact is very much the same as what you're used to seeing, in the sense that it's the same command, same format options, but the output is slightly different. And this is just a makeup of what an artifact more or less looks like, with the exception of the name and the digest. Here we have a single artifact image. It can be reflected as a single layer in there. And the original title of the file was 123. If we look at multiple, here, now you see there are multiple layers. Dan, I'll hit that at the end if that's cool. And you can see there, they're just RD1 and RD2. And they see the size in bytes also there. You can take, I have a file called new artifact. It's just a gzip data file, if you will. And you can add that to your store by doing something like, I mean, it doesn't even have to be that. It can be foobar latest. And you give it the name and then the path to it. Podman artifact add, the image, the fully qualified image reference. We will not do short names with artifacts. And then you can pass one or more files. So there's another one called Homer. I can do 2 files. And the digest comes back. It's worth looking at the add command. There's also now the ability to annotate the artifact files, as well as set an artifact type, which is the overall type for the artifact. Okay. Artifact add will we have a teammate Jan who is currently got a PR that's probably quite close. It won't make 5.4, I don't believe. But it allows you to go in and do something like let's say you wanted to do something like this. You already have that logo. We're going to have an append flag here that would allow you to take an existing artifact and add, say, a new file to it, which will be very handy. It'll be a nice feature. All right. Pull, we already saw. Push, I'm not going to demo because it just will take up bandwidth, but a very, very similar experience as before. And then if you want to remove, it's quite simple here. Podman artifact remove, hit enter, and you get the digest back just as an acknowledgement that it removes it. So where we're going, I talked about the append one. There's a soon to be introduced extract, where you can take a artifact file out of the managed store and pipe it to somewhere on your file system. And then the big one, the big clincher is, and the whole reason we're doing this is we'll write a volume driver for artifacts such that you can mount an artifact right into the container as a volume. You can easily imagine that you're trying to run some AI workload and you want an ML that's distributed as an OCR artifact inside your container. That will become almost trivial to do. And that's really like use case number 1 and goal number 1 for us. So you'll see development on that over the course of the next quarter. Questions before I talk about Dan's question?
I have a question regarding additional layer storage. Will this, when you have, I'm sure you're aware of the image volumes in the Kubernetes world, but what you're talking about, mapping a volume is analogous. Will artifacts travel through the ALS path in order to take advantage of the ALS, or not with your volumes?
With our volumes?
Yeah, where you're going with mounting artifact volumes?
No, it'll be largely a bind mount.
But will it do a bind mount from? Well, ALS also does a bind mount, but
okay.
Without ALS, it downloads the artifact and expands it locally, and with ALS, it doesn't have to do that. Additional layers.
We're not actually touching the artifact. However, we're pulling it down, and in the form that it was pushed will be the same form it ends up in the container.
Understood. Okay. I'll have to see how you implement it, because there are many advantages of additional layer storage for artifacts. In fact, this came up in a meeting with a client, with an end user yesterday.
Yep. Jerry, I'm happy to continue to have conversations with you on that. I am
I think
being
the
asked.
answer is our artifact store is completely separate from our existing image storage and the additional storage that are attached to that. So the artifact location is separate and there's no sharing going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So since it goes through the storage libraries, if you have ALS enabled, it would automatically do that because the storage libraries don't care. Is that what you're saying, Paul?
It doesn't go through those.
It does not.
Does not. Okay. All right. There would be advantages of it doing it, though.
I think, Jerry, why don't you take a look at what's been implemented, and if you have ideas,
Okay.
we'd like to, we consider them. Obviously, pulling these things locally is, I mean, they're, when you're talking about AI images, or if you're talking about things like QCOW2s and things like that, they are huge. So if there was advantages that we could take advantage, allow customers to take advantage of them to eliminate needed to pull, then that would be helpful.
Yeah, exactly. I'll look at how it's implemented.
Yep.
Yeah. What we're trying, really, Jerry, that the technology behind it's not been much of a challenge. The challenge is determining how people are going to actually use these, and not some weird edge use case that we better, our interface on. So the hardest part has been really kind of narrowing down how do we get the most use out of managing artifacts for folks and getting them in the container, because the reality is for advanced function, we have manifests. We have a manifest command with all its verbs, and it's quite flexible. Here, we're just trying to do simplification of how to deal with manifests and how to deal with artifacts.
Okay, again, I haven't looked at the implementation. I'll have to look at it.
Yeah, there is some, the drivers for this right now are mainly AI, and getting something into Kubernetes. So you can imagine if you had, right now in Kubernetes, when people are running AI models, they're just using S3 content, and so Kubernetes really doesn't know about what's going on. But as an OCI content, then Kubernetes could manage it. So it would know when to pull it, which containers are using it, things like that. But that's the number one goal for, and similarly for quadlets and things like that.
Yeah, I was under the impression that image volumes were going to be going through the same storage.
Artifacts versus images, yeah.
No, the Kubernetes 131 new volume type called an image volume.
It does. So that's in there, but that's basically a bastardization of images, right? So what people are doing right now is that they're taking an AI model and they're basically doing a container file that just does a copy of the AI model into an image. So now you have a tied up massive file. Instead of having a massive file, you have a tied up massive file, and you lose the ability to do certain things in it. Or really, what happens is everybody's sort of developing their own way of doing it. So right now, everybody's using OCI images with just single files in them, and the goal of artifacts is to not have to have, not have to do that mechanism.
I hate to squash a good conversation, but we're starting to get up a little bit on the clock, I'm afraid. If we can move along. Did you have answered Dan's question or other questions, Matt?
Yeah, I think, Dan, I'm trying to avoid tagging because it certainly complicates things. I think if in the end use cases bear that out, we'll have to cross that bridge. And we may already be on that bridge. But for now,
right now, can I push from A to B?
no.
Okay. Yes, because I'm thinking more around if I create an artifact that is labeled latest, and I also want to have it labeled as 5.0. To have two labels to the same artifact, and then so that's where I'm seeing, because certain people are going to want to freeze on a certain version of the artifact, and then there'll be newer versions of the artifact coming along.
Right. I think it's fair I think it's a fair ask that when we push, we can name a destination that's different. Yes.
I think if you had that, that would probably eliminate the need for tagging.
Yep. Agree. Any other questions, or we'll kick her back to Tom and move along? Great.
Great. Thanks, Brent. Last chance. Any other questions before we move on to Paul? All righty. Not hearing any, so I am going to go ahead and hand it over to Paul to talk about Netavark 1.14 new features that are coming up. Take it away, Paul.
Okay, you should see my terminal. So this is showcasing a few features that were added, and most of them were actually contributed by community contributors. So many thanks to them. Just showing them off here. So it's not all my work. And so first of all, just to give you an overview of the system here. So I have a bridge, and I have the normal Ethernet device connected to that bridge, and so I want all my traffic going through this bridge, basically, and connected to my containers. And before that, so today you always, or like the bridge code in Netavark always assumed we create our own separate bridge and then do masquerading and DNet and stuff for all the traffic. And now it's a bit different. But the first thing I want to show is some DHCP change where we send the container hostname to the DHCP server. So traditionally, DHCP only worked on MacVLAN. So I'm just showing a very quick MacVLAN example. So if you now run this, I, of course, didn't enable the unit. Perfect. Lovely live demos, aren't it? That's fun. That happens when you reboot before you do your stuff. So, all right, but the start should not work. Perfect. So now you have the usual DHCP. So this is in the network, the same as the VM on the bridge also. And you can see in the logs from the DHCP server, so DNS must queue on my host, we got the host name here. So if you have, your average home router or any advanced router with like graphical interfaces, they have some form of showing you the host names from the DHCP requests. And then you can actually understand which IP is owned by what device, and not just see the MAC addresses, which are randomly generated for our container. So that was a bit annoying to work with. And now you just have the host name, and that's much better. And then there was, to the bridge driver, a new mode added. It's called unmanaged. So if you have the command, the opt mode unmanaged. And what that does is basically disables our management of the bridge, how we think we do it with the masquerading and the NAT. And instead, we don't create firewall rules. We just assume it's an existing bridge that must exist. So I'm using the BR0 bridge from my host. And then you just create the network with that, and it will sort of just directly attach it like most VM manager would handle it. So now the network is created, and I just run a container on it. And I list the rule set. So right now it's a bit, these are all Firewalld rules, so you can ignore them. But at the bottom, usually, if you do it in the normal way, you get the Netavark table with our new NF tables driver. And no, there are no firewall rules at all needed because you're directly connected to a bridge that is directly bridged to some external interface. So we can look at the interfaces. Now you have the web pair for the container. So the one part is attached to the bridge and the other part is in the container. So let's remove these networks. And now you can combine that with DHCP. So the current version just used hard-coded IPs, which are the default, like just the subnet range that is assigned normally. But now I'm requesting the IPAM driver DHCP. And that is now very similar to the McVLAN, which was the first example, what we only did before. And with that, created, so I started a container and I can exec to show the IP addresses. So again, from my local network, got it. So connectivity is also working. It pulls the gateway from the DHCP server. And yeah, it's again, just some web pair assigned and attached. And with that, you now have like this bridge driver working similar to McVLAN. The main difference why you would want to use bridge is if you have an existing bridge setup, like with virtual machines or for whatever reason, then you can have your containers via the same setup, and then all the devices can talk over the bridge. And the bridge also is like the bridge IP exists on the host, and you can talk to the host system, which is not possible via McVLAN. Because McVLAN in the kernel, it's special that it bypasses the host network. And that also means it bypasses like host network firewall rules and routing policies that exist there. And it goes straight to through the McVLAN interface out. And with bridge, the bridge is on the host. So these are the main two differences why you would want to use bridge. And if you need that depends totally on what you want to do. For most people, McVLAN works fine. And that's the demo. There's another new feature, which is VLAN support for the bridge. So you can have two networks with VLAN assigned. So it would look like, I don't have a working demo here because I didn't manage to get VLAN on my bridge interface correctly working without killing my SSH connection before the demo. So, but I can show you how it looks really quick. So you do again a network create, and then you again want to combine this with the mode unmanaged. Managed, and then you just say opt VLAN, and then you use your number that you want to use for this network. So I don't know, VLAN number 10, and then I just call the network like VLAN number 10 and say the bridge interface name BRC. So yeah, that would look something like that for the net config, and then you would run it in the same way. But if I do it right now, it doesn't work on that bridge. But in the end, so if you do bridge VLAN show, unfortunately, I don't have it working. You would have the website assigned to the other VLAN ID, basically, on the ports. And what you can do is basically on the same bridge, so PR0, you can create another network for VLAN 20 and so on, and then you would have all the different VLANs on the same bridge, which, if you have like physical networks and need like this VLAN separation through the subnet, that might be of use for that. And yeah, so I'm probably gonna write a small blog about these features, and then I will hopefully have a working VLAN example to show there. And with that, any questions?
I just have a quick one on the VLAN support. Is that expected to land in 5.4 fully?
That is all expected, or that's all merged. It's in Podman 5.4 and Netavark 1.14, all these features together.
Great. Any other questions? Right, with that, I will thank Paul. Nice demo. And we will move on to our last topic of the day, or not last topic, but our last demo of the day, and have Castedo Ellerman show us about personal multi-session containers and CNest. Go ahead.
Thank you. Let me
Thanks for
share
coming.
my window. Oops. 1 second. So I have a little bit of I guess, give some background first. Thanks for having me show this. Is the size look okay? As far as text size?
Yep.
So just for some background on CNest, the kind of starting point was, I would say, a decade ago, I would SSH from my Mac laptop into local Linux VMs. So when containers came around, that was super exciting to do something better. And when Podman came around, I was super excited about Podman rather than using Docker for many reasons. CNest originally started out as a monolithic Python utility, kind of similar to Toolbox. It was inspired by Toolbox, but at the time, Toolbox was not something I wanted to use for a variety of reasons. It was this utility in its old form was largely motivated by shortcomings of Podman. And last year, I did a massive revamp of this utility because Podman has advanced so much and basically made most of what I had written obsolete. So I wanted to give kudos to the Podman team to basically slowly been adding functionality that made my original script less and less necessary. So what the script is now is really mainly a guide and some starter bash scripts, because I really figured out that the vast majority of functionality could be done by just a thin layer of bash scripts on top of existing Podman functionality. So the website there, this guide is it's in the notes, CNest, and it's mainly talking about how to use Podman. But it also, has an RPM package where you can start out with these two scripts. In terms of a little bit of background for this presentation, I'm partly motivated because I'm curious what other people do, or to the extent that other people are using local containers and actually doing development inside the containers. Over the past 10 years, I've been somewhat surprised that there hasn't been, I don't know, I just something else has come along. So I find myself still kind of using these scripts on top of Podman, which and Toolbox has become very much a tool that integrates very tightly, which is actually isolation is one of the things that I like doing development. And I'm also mildly curious as quick whether anyone has heard people using the term host hop, because that is often how I've been identifying the operating system that's not containerized. As far as the functionality that I'm going to demo next, and kind of the core functionality, because there are a lot of bells and whistles that are thrown into these bash scripts that and what I'm going to show, but at the core level, or the key traits, is that the containers are not ephemeral, they're not immediately auto removed, and they're also not long-term permanent containers. It seems that a lot of users that are doing Toolbox are really using containers as a long-term, like they're holding on these things for like a year or two. And at least for my usage scenario, they're very much not permanent, but they're also not auto remove, so they're persistent in that your isolated changes that you might be doing are staying in the container, not immediately getting removed, but eventually I stop using them. And my containers probably live, it kind of depends on the project and what I'm doing, but they generally live like weeks, maybe, maybe months, but generally they're not the permanent, because I use container files or Docker files with Builda to actually make what's permanent. Some of the other tools, well, I guess like Toolbox, the other key thing is that I switch between doing development on Debian-based distros and Red Hat-based ones. So even though my laptop is on Red Hat, I'm often, flipping back and forth between doing development in the command line on totally different distros, which is one of the things I love about containers. And then at least for my scenario, I know a lot of users don't seem to want this, or they want lots of integration. That's actually one of the things I liked about Podman was kind of it's isolated first. And so I like this aspect of having partial isolation and partial integration. Yeah, Dan, your hand is raised.
Yeah. So how do you, do you have to make a human decision when you want to, or to remove an image, or, do you have tooling? Not a container. Do you have tooling to help you that, list a container I haven't used in the last month?
For the most part, I'm trying to use Builda and Podman as much as possible. So I kind of separately, I'm not showing it here, but I have kind of a setup for building images that's actually continuous integration with GitLab, but it could be locally. But however someone is building images, this is kind of independent of that. And this is more, once you have images, then how are you kind of creating these short-term, medium-term containers? I don't know if that answered your question. At least in this guide, I just suggest people use Podman PS, and I don't do anything fancy.
Okay.
I also have this little, like trivial script that prettifies and shows things in a certain way. But I'll show what it looks like. And if anyone has questions, feel free to interrupt. I won't get thrown off. And I think so that was the last thing. So let me quickly show. So what you're looking at right now is my host top, or the non-containerized environment, and I rely on a little bit of embellishment of having the icons to know where I am. On a typical situation is I'm running one of these wrapper scripts, which is just it's maybe 80 lines. It is part of this RPM that the guide suggests, but it's really trivially enough that I imagine most people would just want to copy it and integrate it into their own scripts. But the CNEST is really just a wrapper to calling Podman. But in my typical usage, I have a couple of containers that I'm hopping into. One of them is development on Fedora, so I'll run CNEST and I'll drop in to a container environment that has some visual indication that I'm in a different container. One of the details is that that I like is that I choose not to have so much integration that my entire home drive is shared. So this home drive has less crap in it than, say, when I'm back at my host top, where I have much more stuff that I should do all much stuff going on. And so, depending on in the container, so they've got another one that's I use for building packages. It'll be much more minimal. So that's an example of these different degrees of isolation that at least, and I'm also somewhat curious to what extent people seek that degree of isolation. Ooh, that's an ugly message. As in terms of listing the containers, so typically, more or less, what I do, I have a script that makes it a little bit nicer to look at. Is I'm just doing PS all. So I'll have containers. They might be running, they might not be. Doesn't matter. I'll just PS and all them. And so you can see I've got these containers that have been around for a while. And I should mention that you'll notice that none of them are currently running. So even though I enter a container, so we're like, right now I'm in this container, and now if I go to a different window and I do PS all, you can see that container has been up for 7 seconds. The script cleans up, so it automatically logs out. And And now you can see that the container is no longer running. So it does a little bit of accounting just to kind of, but for the most part, one of the things that I found I was always kind of working around was this awkwardness of whether containers are running or not, when really what I'm going for is multi-session, being able to have multiple terminal windows and be able to jump in and jump out of the container with its separate semi-isolated environment for development. So that covers CNest. There's a lot of bells and whistles.
In CNest, do you have some kind of special configuration file? I mean, when you saw your limited home directory there, those are bind mounts from the home directory or volume mounts from the home directory?
Yes, yeah. So actually, let me answer that question after I show the other bash script. That's basically a wrapper for Podman create. So CNest is basically just a wrapper for Podman run, or actually exec. Now that I think about it, it's a wrapper for Podman exec. Because if you notice, the command that's running in the background is always sleep inf. So these containers, these multi-session personal multi-session containers, they're just always running sleep inf in the background with a couple of settings so that it's just quietly running in the background if it hasn't been cleaned up. The one other nice thing with this bash script is if you are jumping into a container from a directory that's shared, it's smart enough to know to stay in it. So for instance, right now I'm in a subdirectory called source on my home drive. If I jump into this container, I'm still in the source subdirectory. So that makes a lot more convenient hopping between the host top and one of these containers, and that if you're in a subdirectory that's shared, you don't have to constantly be CDing back into that directory. And there are other bells and whistles. Now, as far as configuration and how did those, only part of the home drive show up, something that I ended up kind of settling on for the other script. It's called create cnest, and it's largely a wrapper of Podman create. But what I've found is if the image is done as the first part of the parameter, so Podman has a bit of this awkwardness, or what I found awkwardness in the command line, in that you have lots and lots of options at the almost at the end. You then have the image, and then you have potentially a command. And what I found with this wrapper script is that because of auto completion, if the image is at the beginning, it makes it very conducive to having wrapper scripts that then just tack on options on the end. And I end up wrapping these scripts and doing configuration by just adding things in. And by having the image be first, it makes it easy to have auto completion set up. So for instance, what I'm going to show here is using the Podman on Quay, the Podman image, but with all the configuration goodness that I kind of like. I'm going to start out running this create cnest without a lot of configuration, but I'm going to do tab completion now, and you can see I'm getting all the images that are on my machine. And one thing that I've really liked is, so for instance, I'll start typing Quay and I'll do tab and it'll complete it, Podman stable. So right now, because the image is the very first thing on the command line, it's easy to get the auto completion set up and have the nice features of Podman, but in a much simpler wrapper script that doesn't require all this extra stuff.
But you basically don't ever run a command inside of the container. You always run bin shell inside the container.
Yes.
So that's how to do that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. When the container's created, the command is sleep inf. So it's basically always sleep inf. So as long as the container has sleep inf, it's basically happy. And then when I run the wrapper script cnest I think it's doing bin bash. Yeah, and I'm execing in. Yeah,
execing the command at that point.
So a very typical workflow is I'll do create cnest. I'll grab some image. Often these images are continuous integration images that I've built. that I'm using both for kind of local developments and also using them in a continuous integration environment. So one thing that I've kind of liked is not having the requirement of starting with a base that has a bunch of extra stuff in it. I start with images that are just kind of bare bones, and then maybe add on a few other things. But a lot of the personalization is getting added on the fly by this create CNest. So I'm going to do Podman, and I'm going to tack on a name. You know, I can add other things. What's nice is that because these are getting added on the end, is actually, I may not do a volume. All these options that usually go to Podman Create, I can just tack on over and over again. And I found that very, very nice for wrapper scripts. So I'm going to show just a base level create CNest here, where I'm creating Poddy. I'm going to now CNest into this Poddy that I named Poddy, and it's got, you know, basically nothing because I haven't added anything. Now, if I added, let me see if I can do this on the fly. You know, I could have added a volume where I said, let's see, source. Home. See if I can do this quickly enough. And oh, I need to give it a different name. So this one, I just tacked on a volume, you know, on the command line. And so now when I go in, well, you can see it actually detected that that the source subdirectory is shared. And so it's just plopped me down into source in the container. But now I've got, you know, this subdirectory that I shared as a volume is now in that container, and it automatically detects that, you know, if I'm in that subdirectory on the host top, when I CNest in, it detects that I'm there and puts me in that subdirectory. So it's been very convenient. The last thing I'll show is the wrapping of create CNest, and that's partly because the image is at the beginning. Is I have various different configurations. So right now I've gone into a subdirectory on my host top with a variety of wrappers of this wrapper script, depending on the environment. So for instance, if I want to use one of my development settings, I will get all the yummy goodness of autocompletion because it's called CNest. So if I tab complete, I can still get all these, all these containers. It's a wrapper. So this script is actually just a wrapper calling create CNest, and it's adding on a bunch of volumes and extra configuration. To answer, Dan, your question, it's just tacking on the end all these extra things that I want when I'm going into my own container on the end. And so now I get this nice combination of autocompletion where I can say, you know, Quay, Podman latest. I can just tack on, you know, a different name, pod, awesome. I could add on some more things, but because I'm going to call this wrapper script, it just is tacking on all these things. This container has been created with all the users and what I call this pod awesome. And so now I have, you know, all this extra stuff that's in there, but this is actually the base of it is the Podman stable container image. So the container image is like, you know, I pulled it off. It has very few assumptions. It did not assume anything about the user ID. I'm actually coming in as a completely different user ID, but it's it's actually the user, you know, that I'm on the system, so I can, you know, write things to my, to the host top. Oops. So I think that's basically it. Let me.
Yeah,
So my big question is what do other people have kind of isolated environments? Do most people do development kind of on the host top in the non-containerized environment? If anyone does do development actually inside the containers, well, like would they just do kind of raw Podman or wing their own shell scripts or use, I guess, maybe some fancy GUI? I don't know.
So one thing you're not using right now is that we have we added to Podman is the concept of modules. I don't know if are you familiar with modules?
No.
So what modules are is basically, probably know what a containers.conf file is, right? Basically, you're able to modify the way Podman works. So what modules do is allow you to specify a specific containers.conf file for the container you're going to create. And one of the things, for instance, you were showing that your scripts have sort of hard-coded volume mounts that you're putting into them. You could create a containers.conf file that would list out your, the common source directory and .ssh directory, whatever you want to volume mount into your containers. And instead of having to have individual scripts, you could have, the equivalent of Podman run -- module equals standard volumes or something like that, and it would automatically mount those volumes. So now you could have a name for your standard configuration, and you can do everything you just did with cnest -- modules. And then I don't know if it would just
And can you include these into each other? I mean, as far as nesting, so having a base.
Yeah, so modules inherit from each other. So
Okay.
It's they would nest. But if you put volumes in one, I think there is a syntax for it, plus equals volumes. Anyways, the people who doing that caught us to do that was HPC World. So this is a lot of government agencies that are doing really, really complex Podman commands for their users do that. But where they're doing, usually it's like I have this, I want all my users to run the same Podman command, but it has 45 options on it. So now they consolidate all those options into a single modules.
And is that for Podman run, or can it be used with create?
It can be used with create.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's something that I would definitely look into, because now I don't know if
when did that go into Podman?
Probably about maybe a year ago.
Okay. So I probably should update the guide to talk about, or I should start using them.
I would look at it, because it can do things like, you could set pretty much any option you want. And so if you're currently doing everything as long lines of Podman commands, dash security opt equals, seccomp disabled or whatever, then you can put that into a configuration file, and then just use that configuration file as something standard. But it's actually for exactly the use case that you're doing, where you you want these complicated. I like the idea of the thin down home directory. So most people that are using similar to this are using obviously Toolkit. So that's probably our biggest user of long lasting containers. But the HPC was looking into, again, modules.conf for similar.
You meant Toolbox rather than Toolkit?
Toolbox, I'm sorry. I said Toolkit. Toolbox. The other area that I've been interested in is Podman Shell, which is basically lockdown shells that stick users in, and what we're using there for is quadlets. So the other area would become interesting is basically defining a quadlet as a mechanism for defining what the user environment is going to be when user gets exec into it. I kind of like that. I think you have some interesting ideas, for setting up these type of environments. My only thing is you must have to deal with a huge amount of containers that you're always, getting and destroying and things like that.
It's probably, I sometimes think I'm going a bit crazy with containers and creating lots of them. So yeah, it does seem sometimes it's getting a bit crazy, but yeah, it is. I think I may be creating and destroying the same profile, or what would there are certain kind of job roles, and I'll use different containers on the job role. But I'm probably destroying some of these maybe every few weeks.
Yeah,
I'll be.
So if you create one that's already got an existing name, are you doing a replacement at that point? And
rename.
So you're doing a rename, and
Yeah.
if the container is running, you're going to stop it, restart it.
Yeah, they're usually not running that often. I mean, it's easy to stop. There's not much to stopping them, but yeah, I do rename. And to be honest, that when that feature went into Podman, that was a real that really improved my workflow a lot, because I was doing all kinds of workarounds and extra scripting to work around this limitation of not renaming. So yeah, and you may have noticed that I actually had a container there that was called like, dev.old. Because that was, what I had before, and it was kind of gotten all dirty. And but yeah, I use rename.
Yeah, I'm going to ask the rep to step only because we're past time at this point in time.
Yes.
So, are there any more questions or comments here?
So last comment, quick. If you see any features you would like to see in Podman to make these easier for you to build, then I think that would be, please suggest them.
Yeah. I'll after I update modules, I'll try to. I feel like there's been a nice trend where all this stuff that I wrap is getting more and more obsolete as Podman does more and more stuff. So I'm more than happy to help contribute to that obsolescence.
Excellent. All right.
All right. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Costello. It was great little talk and great demo as well.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to skip over forums, questions. If anybody has any, please let us know offline. We don't have any topics currently for the next meeting, which will be in 2 months in April. Love to have something there if you have any thoughts there. And our next meeting again will be no fooling, April Fool's Day, April 1st, 2025, again at 11 a.m. And our next Cabal meeting is coming up on Tuesday, March 4th. So with that, I'm going to thank everybody for coming, especially the presenters, and I'm going to stop recording.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.